Support for Consider This is provided by the University of Nebraska at Omaha College of Communication, Fine Arts, and Media.
From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
During normal hearing, sound waves travel through the ear canal and strike the eardrum, causing it to vibrate. The eardrum is attached to three tiny bones in the middle ear. The last bone, the stapes, pushes on a fluid-filled chamber in the inner ear called the cochlea. This fluid movement causes sensitive hair cells within the cochlea to bend. When the hair cells bend, they generate an electrical signal that is sent to the brain. Age, disease, injury, or repeated exposure to loud noise can damage the various structures of the ear and interfere with hearing. There are two specific types of hearing loss: conductive hearing loss, which is caused by a mechanical problem in the ear canal or middle ear that blocks the conduction of sound, or sensory neural hearing loss, which is caused by damage to the inner ear, auditory nerve, or auditory nerve pathways in the brain. Conductive hearing loss is often reversible. Sensory neural hearing loss is not.
Okay, so what type of help is available and how has it morphed and evolved over the years? Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, the history of hearing instruments. Joining us to talk more about it is Janie York. Janie is the founder and owner of Hear Now Mobile Hearing Solutions. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Kathy.
I want to start off with, I know it's a broad question, but how do you explain hearing loss to people?
Well, it's a combination of not being able to hear what is coming at you and also not understanding some of the words that are being spoken. So I hear this a lot. Well, I hear, but I don't understand. And it's a combination of the two problems that causes us to be hard of hearing, to isolate ourselves, to stop doing things we once used to do because we just can't engage in the conversations anymore.
Wow, what percentage of us has some type of hearing loss?
You know, the percentages kind of vary depending on what research you're looking at, but it sounds like about 37.5 million people in the United States ages 18 and over have some type of hearing loss. But unfortunately, it usually takes 4 to 5 years for someone from the time they notice their hearing loss until they get help, and sometimes it's much longer.
Wow, and you are one of those many, many people. Janie, talk to us about the beginning of your journey, maybe those 4 or 5 years that you mentioned.
You know, the beginning was pretty easy. I had a real mild sensory neural hearing loss in my right ear. I wore an in-the-ear hearing aid. It helped. I had perfect hearing in my left ear. So it really wasn't a real big deal. I wore my hair long and it really never showed. And then about 15 years after that, I discovered that I have Meniere's disease, which is it's a problem with the fluids in your inner ear. It's pressure and it's mixing of the fluids that should never mix. And it causes extreme vertigo, tinnitus, and in my case, eventual hearing loss. So over about a year's time, I dealt with those vertigo attacks and the tinnitus, but then very suddenly I lost all of the hearing in my left ear and about half in my right. So then I really belonged to the hard of hearing group. My doctor, Dr. Thedinger, fit me with a wireless bicross hearing aid, which has just changed my life.
Wow. Now, the Meniere's disease, you talk about this taking 4 or 5 years for people to really catch on that maybe there's something going on. Was there something specific when you look back on all of that where you're thinking, something's really not right here? And did you let it go for a little while?
You know, the Meniere's disease is not very well known. And so I was seeing an ENT for a good part of that year that I was dealing with it, and he really didn't know what to do. He had me on a tranquilizer when I had the attack that would lay a horse down. And so I really didn't get a lot of help with it. I found Dr. Thedinger farther along in the journey. So they don't really know a lot about the cause other than it does involve those fluids in your inner ear. So they think it might be very stress related, and it was a very difficult time in my personal life at that time. So that may have contributed to it, I'm not sure.
Yeah, you talk about challenges, and you mentioned that we all have challenges going on in our day-to-day. You add something like this, and you mentioned you found a doctor, which is great. What challenges do people run up against in terms of hearing loss?
Many. Communicating in the workplace, that's a real difficult challenge, because I remember working in a very loud office and trying to hear an answering machine or a phone call. It's almost impossible. Meetings can be very difficult for people with hearing loss, because we know a lot of times in these big meetings there's a lot of side talk, which is very distracting anyway, and then when you're trying to listen to the meeting when you have hearing loss, especially if it's uncorrected, you may really miss most of it and just have to wait for the minutes of the meeting to come out before you know anything. And of course, communicating with your family. I talk to a lot of family members who wish their spouse or their parent would get their ears checked and do something with their hearing so that they could engage in conversation again.
Talk about how this hearing loss has gotten you to where you are today. Tell us what you're doing, and when did you arrive at that moment where you thought, oh my goodness, this is what I'm going to do.
Okay, it was an interesting journey. I'm a recreation therapist, and I was working as an activity director at a nursing home here in Omaha, and I found that many of my residents owned hearing aids, but they weren't using them. So just informally, I decided to go out and start visiting them and see why weren't you using these? Well, they hated them, it didn't work. And in most cases, I found that it didn't work because it was packed with wax. It had not been cleaned for probably a year, and you really can't wait that long. So I just started cleaning hearing aids and educating people. And it didn't take long before I had it on my calendar every 2 weeks. And I was doing this as a regular part of my job. So when I left that job and went to another one in another nursing home, I started the program right away and had phenomenal results again. So I decided then to start building the concept of the business, and my business opened in August. And right now I'm in 6 buildings doing hearing aid care, education, hearing tests, and dispensing hearing aids as needed. But my first goal is to help them use what they already have.
I think it's interesting. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking there's this stigma, I think, sometimes with any kind of device, glasses or something coming out of your ear. And I guess what I thought was people didn't wear them mainly because of something like that. What it's sounding like, though, is they just weren't functioning properly. And so you just get to a point where you think, why is this even in my ear? And you take it out
and you just stop wearing it. I just saw a gentleman last week who hadn't worn his hearing aids for 6 months because they weren't working. And it took me less than 10 minutes to clean it and put in a fresh battery, and it was working fine.
So when did you become fascinated in the history of the hearing instruments then?
You know, when I started developing presentations for education for staff, I thought it would be interesting for them to see how hearing instruments have evolved. And of course, being in the industry, I'm always fascinated with how did we get to where we are.
So when we talk hearing instruments, how far back do we go in terms of that very first attempt at making our hearing a little bit better?
I'm not really sure when the very first one was, probably here. But what I brought is an 1800s hearing horn.
Okay, so this hearing, this is fascinating stuff. So the hearing horn, now, do we go back further than the 18th? So what would have preceded what you're about to show us?
You know, what I've seen farther back is very similar to this. They oftentimes are shorter and sometimes very ornately decorated. They were often made by jewelers, and so it would have been just a short piece, maybe just a little longer than this end piece, that would be put into someone's ear. Longer ones, like this, were also common. They were also called communication tubes. And so they would be used, of course, for people who are hard of hearing, but also for people wanting to have a conversation in a noisy carriage. or even young people who were courting would use it because they couldn't sit close to each other with their chaperone in the room. So they would use this to speak to each other more privately.
And they actually work.
Yes,
I'll
they do.
be darned. And then, so this
I think
was
they're fascinating.
1800s, you say.
Mhm.
So people would speak in the one end, and then
Right,
they'd hold
and
it up.
these would be in their ear.
And I read somewhere that some folks did a pretty good job of disguising them because they didn't want people to know
Right.
that they had that they had that challenge.
That's true. But this is hard to disguise.
Yeah.
It's not very. It's
I don't
not
know how
very
you
discreet.
dress that up. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not very discreet.
Wow, but very, very interesting. And
yeah.
then time moves forward, and you've brought just several items for us
couple other
today.
things here.
But this one I think is fascinating.
I love this concept actually because I think it would really help people stop losing their hearing aids because it's all together.
Yeah.
But these are hearing glasses. So you have your eyeglass prescription and then your hearing aids are attached here, and the technology or the programming for the hearing aid is in the bows. So they wear the glasses and put the hearing aids in and you're good to go.
Now, what year approximately would this have been?
You know, these came out on the market in the 50s.
Okay.
And I did an internet search the other day, and these are still being manufactured in Australia, and they have Bluetooth capabilities and everything that the new hearing aids have, but they're hearing glasses.
What I think is really fascinating about this, we as a society aren't as reluctant to correct our vision
Right.
as we are to correct our hearing. And
Right.
what I love about this is it's a reminder that hey, if we have a deficit somewhere, it's okay
It
to go
is.
ahead and address it, and this addresses both
It is.
at the same time.
Yes, yes. I love it. I think they're very cool.
I think that is
And you can
fascinating.
control volume right here on both
Oh,
sides.
on the back there.
Yeah, this is the volume wheel.
So someone would go in, and if their vision had changed somewhat, they might correct the lens, but
Right.
maybe do nothing back here,
Right.
or vice versa.
Right, and they could do programming on these like we do now. It's not as easy because now we do all the programming on a
Sure.
computer, but they had some programming changes they could make as a person's hearing changed.
Wow.
Yeah, I think they're very cool.
I bet you get quite a bit of feedback on that
do.
when you're showing it.
I do.
And Zenith, of course, a big name, and so you
Right.
have a device here that was put together.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little
So
bit about that.
This is called a body aid. So much like what we do in this setting, you put the hearing aid box somewhere on yourself and then pull this up maybe through your clothing, and then the mold goes in your ear. Now, men would typically just put it in their pocket, but they manufactured a lot of undergarments with pockets that women might use to carry this in an
Okay.
undergarment, maybe on their thighs or somewhere more hidden, so that they weren't actually just carrying this. It would not be very comfortable to use. It's pretty heavy. So
Oh, it sure is.
so
Yeah,
imagine if
that'd
you
be-
had one on each side.
Yeah, exactly.
So
And I
it
can't
wouldn't be a
imagine.
real comfortable thing, but it had more options, more power than maybe what you'd find in the glasses. And so people had a few more things that they could do. You could correct a bigger hearing loss. So, this was one of the first transistor type hearing aids. It wasn't a vacuum tube. I don't have an example of a vacuum tube aid, but those were really large.
Yeah, so how would you describe that in terms of, if somebody said paint a picture? I mean, I think of vacuums obviously, but what are we thinking about here?
Well, if you think of the old-time TV sets with vacuum tubes inside of them, a glass tube, maybe so big around and so tall, of course the vacuum tubes in a hearing aid would be much smaller, but still the device was quite large.
Wow.
And you would still have to wear it. You know, I've seen them strapped to a person's body, the vacuum tube type.
Wow.
They're very big, and I imagine they were pretty uncomfortable to wear.
Now, Zenith did several of
Yes.
these, correct? I mean,
They did.
they updated them, and it was in what kind of a time frame are we talking?
Oh, probably from maybe the early 60s up into the mid 80s.
And then in the 80s, what happened, Janie?
Well, then things started to go digital.
Okay.
And that opened up the possibility of hearing aids getting smaller. Now, in your opening segment, you showed that big beige one that would go behind your ear. That's what most people think of when they think about a hearing aid. They're large, with a piece that went in your ear, the ear mold. But from that design, they got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And because of the digital capabilities, now it's like you're wearing a small computer in your ear.
Wow, and we have a picture of the smaller ones just to give people kind of an idea of where we've been
Right.
and where we are today, that we want to go ahead and put up for our viewers just so that they can kind of see what you're talking
Right.
about here. So the one on the left,
Yeah.
I mean, are we taking it oldest to newest, Janie?
Yes, oldest to newest there. So the one on the left is a behind the ear aid, and the piece coming down is your ear mold. So the tubing connects the hearing aid to the ear mold. So they wear the ear mold in their ear, and the other piece goes back behind their ear. So they could adjust volume. They could sometimes have 2 or 3 programs for maybe noise or telephone in that hearing aid. And then all the others are in the ear aids. They're made by making an impression of the ear, and then they make that hearing aid to match the shape of your ear. The next one there, you see the rotary wheel on the bottom. That is for volume, and it looks like we've got the same type on those others. The very last one looks like it has a push button for volume, which is more common on the newer ones.
So we're really talking some pretty sophisticated technology. Would you
Absolutely.
say that this, what we're looking at, what we're talking about today, is up to par in terms of where we are big picture with technology, or are we a bit behind the curve? What are you thinking?
No, I think we are definitely up with technology.
Okay.
I know that manufacturers now are looking at things like even a gyroscope inside of that hearing aid in the programming to be able to tell if a person has fallen, can tell the difference between a fall and just lying down. It might even have the capability of notifying someone if there's a fall.
Wow.
So that's not on the market yet, but that is in development.
Well, and two, if I remember correctly, there's something out there where you were talking about having total hearing loss in one ear, but because of devices and technology being what they are, you're still maybe able to detect things coming from that side? Is
Yes.
that, and
Yes.
what's doing that for you?
So I have a wireless Bicross system. So my hearing aid on the left, which is my deaf side, picks up the sound and transmits it to the right side where I have hearing. So it gives me the feeling of hearing on both sides, and it really helps with my spatial awareness. Now, I don't always hear maybe a waitress coming on my left side, but I have a much better chance of it. But, you know, in a work situation,
Right.
it's wonderful because I can really hear so much better with both hearing aids in.
Wow. Now you talk about tools, and we oftentimes think of them in our ear, but this device, this is pretty cool.
This-
Tell us what we're seeing there.
This is just one of the best things that I ever found. This is called a remote microphone.
Okay.
So the person that you want to hear would wear it just like a lapel clip, and then it Bluetooths their voice to my hearing aid. And no one else hears it, just me. It just has changed my life. I use it in meetings, I use it when I'm at a conference. It's wonderful. The very first time I ever used it was in a cave tour at the Oregon Caves. We love going on cave tours, but that's the worst place to hear.
Yeah.
So I gave this to the ranger, and for the first time ever, I could hear everything she said about that cave tour. As long as I stay within about 50 feet of the speaker, I can hear.
So, Janie, give us a better idea for folks who are experiencing that deficit. You talk about caves, and I often think of really noisy restaurants as being, what are some other problematic scenarios that we may not think about until we have a challenge?
One of the most challenging situations is sitting with a group of people having a conversation. Because if you can think about maybe sitting around a table with a group of girlfriends, well, You have speakers changing all the time, people probably talking fast, subjects changing very quickly. It is very hard for a person who's hard of hearing, even with good tools, to keep up with all of that. So if you know that you're with someone who's hard of hearing, every now and then maybe ask them if they're doing okay, if they know what you're talking about. Maybe help them with some type of a statement as you're changing topics to help them catch on to what's happening next.
Okay. I think the other big piece of this is awareness. I think we don't always assume that just folks who are aging can experience hearing loss. It can happen to somebody at any point in their life. And I think step number one is to just be cognizant and aware of that. So if I'm visiting with somebody and I'm realizing that that's what's going on, how's the best way for me to respond?
Well, actually, if you are, just make sure that you're facing them, like we're facing each other. Talk in just a normal tone of voice, but watch your speed. People talk really fast anymore. And if we slow our speech down just a little bit, that person is more likely to understand you. Be aware of when they're asking you to repeat yourself. And if they ask you to repeat yourself more than twice on the same thing that you have said, instead of repeating it again, rephrase it. Because there might be a combination of words and letters that they just can't understand due to where their hearing loss falls.
Yeah, and I think one of the other interesting things for folks to be aware of, especially as we hear more and more about dementia, talk about the potential correlation there, Janie.
More and more research is coming out now showing a real connection between untreated hearing loss and dementia. Because with untreated hearing loss, people are going to isolate. They stop going to things that they used to enjoy going to. They can't process what they're hearing because they're not hearing everything. They miss so much of conversation. And oftentimes that is mistaken for dementia and then will eventually move into dementia as a person isolates more and has less and less understanding of what's going on around them.
Okay, thank you. And in the minutes that we have remaining, I think it's really important that we talk about process. Earlier in the interview, you said sometimes people can go 4 or 5 years. It gradually kind of sneaks up on us, and then there's a little piece of denial in there as well. So what if someone thinks that they are experiencing a significant enough loss to go be seen? What are the steps they take?
So find a provider, practitioner that you feel comfortable with first. Interview several. Pick one, get a hearing test, and if it shows that a hearing aid would be beneficial to you, it's best if you go ahead with that right away, because the longer you wait, the longer your auditory nerves are unused. And the longer they're unused, you could go into something called auditory deprivation. And you may not understand speech and conversation as well as you would have had you gotten help right away. My audiologist tells me the reason I have such good speech recognition is because I got a hearing aid as soon as I saw that I was losing it. So you need to keep those auditory nerves in place and working. And look at your lifestyle. What do you need? Do you need something like this? Do you need a television streamer? Do you need really high-tech hearing aids? Do you need something really simple? Look at what your lifestyle dictates and what you really have to have, and then find a way to do it. There's a lot of help out there. Sertoma, Starkey helps with hearing aids for people who can't afford them. There are a lot of programs that you can look into.
You mentioned the word can't, or words I should say, can't afford. I think one of the biggest reasons people avoid even the medical profession at all is because they're afraid of what that price tag is going to be at the end of the visit. And we don't need to go a lot into costs. We know that things are expensive. But what would you tell people who are shying away from that because they're fearful of the cost?
Find someone who is fair. Some hearing aids I have had reported to me do cost $10,000, and they should not. I would say if you should be able to find a good pair of hearing aids from $2,500 to $3,500 for the pair. If you can't, you might want to keep looking. I know some will edge up toward $5,000 depending on your hearing loss, depending on what kind of a hearing aid you're getting. If you are getting the very top of the line in any manufacturer's line, it could inch up depending on what things that you have put in that hearing aid.
Wow. Thank you for that advice. We are talking about the history of hearing instruments today, and for people who are wanting more information, we have a couple of websites that we want to go ahead and put up. Janie, one of them I know is your website.
My website is www.hearnowsolutions.com.
And of course the other one, hearingaidmuseum.com. Janie, I want to thank you so much for being here today and sharing your time, your expertise, your stories, to our students who are working so hard behind the scenes, of course to our viewers for watching. As we close, a trip to Omaha's Joslin Art Museum is seen through the lens of Journey Trimble, a junior here at UNO. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at netnebraska.org/Consider This. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.
Support for Consider This is provided by the University of Nebraska at Omaha College of Communication, Fine Arts, and Media.